Hello and welcome to this video. This video will be about Liszt and his daily routine. I did one about Chopin lately, one about Mozart too. This one is about Liszt. I will just try to understand his daily work habits and when he woke up, what he did and how he composed, how he practiced. I have a little book where I have different routines of composers, and there it's shortly explained by one of his students who lived in his castle, I think, with him. Like many students live there, and he's explaining what Liszt did, and it's actually quite special. Good morning. So it's 5 and today I'm gonna follow Liszt routine. So Liszt woke up at 5, then had some dry bread and a coffee. No, actually he woke up at 4 and then he went to the church for praying, and I was checking if any church was open today at 4, but my student who works in church said no church is open, but he could arrange one. And then actually he could arrange one, but it was half an hour from here. So I said, or even more, I said, no, it's fine. I'll skip this. I wanted to have the experience of going to the church because I think Liszt was very religious, but I think also it's very quiet. You know, the city is sleeping. I think this kind of atmosphere can be nice to focus before starting work. So I think that's why he did it. And part of why he did it. So unfortunately I cannot do this, but I will have the breakfast, and then so student is describing his daily routine, and he says like at 5 they were having coffee together with some dry bread, and then they started to answer letters and practice pieces until 8. And then at 8 the post came. There were always a lot of post because he was a celebrity, so he had a lot of correspondence, people writing him, and was writing back, family too. So we'll see. I will practice a bit from 5 to 8, then 8 I will look at my social media post, see what I have a lot of message on YouTube, people who write that I have to answer. Yeah, basically he from 5 to 1 he answered message, post and practice and compose probably. So it's now 5:30, and problem with this time is the neighbors. Now Liszt lived in a castle for a very long time in the Altenburg in Weimar, so there he could practice as much as he wanted because he was alone. He had students staying over there, but basically he was living in his place. There was no neighbors. And then later he lived in his apartment in Weimar, and there I'm not sure if he had neighbors. Probably not. I think he had also the first floor, so I think he was quite free to work and practice early and late in the night, which is a nice thing. I have an electric piano for if I want to practice or play music late or early in the night. By the way, behind me, the whole blue books I will show later again, that's all Liszt piano work, only piano work. There's more, of course. There's the orchestral work, the religious work, chamber music. And I was just thinking, if he was, well, answering letters and stuff, but also practicing and composing from 5 to 1 p.m. and then having lunch and then composing again until late in the evening sometimes. Basically he was working all day, like non-stop. Yeah, so I have the comments on YouTube. How many do I have today? Not so many this morning, not so many. I have like 1, 2, 3, 4 comments morning, so mostly nice comments, sometimes a bit nasty comments. Exactly. And then the piano has very sound, that's nice. Trillo, irregolo. Yeah, so there are some people who tell me that I play bad piano, or that my trill is not good, or that my octaves are not good. Oh no, there are more than 4 comments. How can we say a famerule? No idea what this is. So let's actualize, see if there's more. That's it. I answered my comments of today on YouTube, and then I have to check actually the one on Instagram. So yeah, that's the little experience I have, the closest experience I have to Liszt. I'm done with the comments. I probably will have some new comments at 8, but till then I can practice. So in Liszt, when Liszt lived in his castle Altenburg, he had many pianos. Well, actually, he had many pianos all his life because people always send him pianos, and not people. Piano builders always send him pianos. Since he was the most famous pianist on the planet, they hoped that this would be a great advertisement for the pianos, and it was actually. So I saw, for example, in the museum in Budapest, where he had an apartment because he was honorary director of the conservatory when the conservatory was created there in Budapest, and they had a room for him. No, actually, they had a 3-room apartment, I think. 3 rooms, yeah, on the last floor of the conservatory that was for him. So he had a bedroom and a living room, and in the living room he was giving lessons when he was there. And in the museum of Budapest, where they still have his pianos, there are two Schickering, so it's an American brand. That thing doesn't exist anymore. He had one Bösendorfer there, and then he had like some small pianos that for example, he had a small piano that Mozart had or something. Then he had a small harmonium that's like making like an organ sound. So he had this kind of experimental instrument too in his apartment. In Weimar, in his castle, he had grand Erard piano. He had also kind of organ piano that Erard made for him, if I'm right. He had the Broadwood of Beethoven that he bought, and he apparently never played on it. He wanted to keep it intact. And then in his composition room, which was, I think, downstairs, he had Boisselot, was a French piano maker, and he toured a lot with Boisselot, and he was very friend with Boisselot, but then he was very much friend with Erard too. Strangely enough, he had no Pleyel, never saw he had a Pleyel. And then later in his life, Steinway offered him a piano, but he had no space for this, so he gave it to a student, I think, or a friend. And he had his Grand Bechstein in his apartment in Weimar, a more modern piano that he kept for the rest of his days. There he had also, I think, a Bösendorfer upright piano behind the Bechstein. I think it's a Bösendorfer, yeah. Let me know if it's another one. And what else? Yeah, he had tons of piano. He had a Bechstein, an older Bechstein before too. I don't know where this one was. He must have had a piano in Rome because he had an apartment in Rome too, and I think he probably had an upright piano there, or maybe a grand piano too. And I'm probably forgetting some piano. So he had like tons of pianos in all directions. Yeah, interesting. And then of course he had like pianos he had with touring. For example, Boisselot gave him a piano for a concert tour. Yeah, interesting. So let's practice a bit. Can feel I'm still not really awake actually. Like I'm not used to be awake at 5. But I guess you get used to this if you do this a lot. If you do this every day, you get used to this kind of time. I'm still a bit sleepy. Actually, my time is more 7 or 8. So you can see here what I mean. Liszt was working a lot. He was a kind of workaholic, waking up at 4, going to sleep late, 11 or 12, something like this. Of course, he was invited sometimes for dinner or for lunch, but the days he was not, he was working, practicing, or composing most. His late years, he was probably more composing than practicing because he didn't do concerts anymore. He ended his concert career when he was 37 and decided he wanted to dedicate himself to composition and conducting orchestra. So he conducted the Weimar Orchestra, and there he made the creations of a lot of Wagner operas actually, and other composition, and his own symphonic poems. But you can see like his original works are until here, until this book. That's his original compositions. Then you have transcriptions and paraphrase. That's everything until here. And then you have second or third, actually there are 3 books of exercise here, and then you have second versions or third versions of works that are actually different enough to consider them as works, which is the rest here. A lot of work, a lot of piano. So that's around 700 piano works, and yeah, I don't know anyone who composed that much for only one instrument. I mean, if you see Chopin work is more or less this here. Where is it here? That's more or less Chopin work. You can say it's this. That's all Schumann piano work. Mostly it's something like this, the whole composition of piano work of a composer. Brahms is also 3 volumes there. Beethoven, Mozart is like 5-6 volumes there. Yeah, there is a big difference. And even if you consider only his original works, it's still really a lot. So it's now 9, and as Liszt I would have been practicing from 5 to 9. I had posts coming in at 8, but I don't have so much posts. In Liszt time there was a lot more posts, we go to each other. Now I was thinking, so actually he was working really a lot. So he was working from 5 to 1 p.m. That's 8 hours work already, practicing, composing, writing. So let's say 7, or let's say 6, because maybe he was just corresponding 2 hours. So 6 hours, then he had lunch, and lunchtime he had the glass of wine. That's French tradition. The French mostly drink at lunchtime. And then the interesting stuff is he kept drinking all afternoon until the evening and smoking cigars. And the student who is describing his day is saying he could drink sometimes until 2 bottles of cognac, which is strong alcohol, and 3 bottles of wine in a day. So Liszt was basically a severe alcoholic. He seemed fine to practice and to compose though, and I guess it was only the last years of his life that he reached that point, because it's the time also where he was teaching a lot, and that's more the last years. So maybe he would have lived longer if he didn't drink so much, but he was actually a bit like disappointed of life, and a bit more dark, negative. You can hear this in his last works too. They get quite simplistic, or pure, épuré in French. There's not much virtuosity anymore, there are not many notes, and it's mostly a bit dark mooded, his last works. Interesting to listen at. I will play some later. So yeah, he was drinking a lot. I will not experiment this today, because actually I'm in a non-drinking phase for the moment in my life, so not the right time to try this. But I had this experience of drinking at lunch, and then drinking a bit in the afternoon, and then in the evening. And my experience is it makes you tired, but also if you do this long enough, you get used to this, and then you don't feel the alcohol effect anymore. And then also what he was doing, he was drinking coffee after lunch. So he was having wine, lunch, then drinking coffee, then drinking wine again, smoking cigars. I think altogether it's very unhealthy, of course, like makes sense. But yeah, like I said, you get used to this, so you can kind of keep living like this for a while. And he actually died from a cold, but who knows whatever he had that we didn't discover, because we didn't scan his body to know what disease he had, right? So yeah, this was like his life routine at the end. And then I said he worked 6 hours, let's say in the morning, then he had this lunch, then he actually, the student is not telling anymore about his work habits, but I think he was keeping working until late in the night, because he said also that sometimes he was sleeping in the afternoon 2 hours, because he had this sleepless night where he was turning in his room, walking around his room, working on a composition or practicing some stuff. Now it must be mostly composing, because he didn't practice that much anymore the last years, because he didn't perform any more real public concerts, with some exceptions. So mostly composing at the piano. And so if we count from 2 p.m. until, let's say, 11 in the night, that's again, how many? That's like 4 and 5, that's 9 hours more, let's say -2, so because he was sleeping 2 hours, let's say, or something. So that's still 7 hours. So he was probably doing twice 6 hours or something. So around 12, 13 hours of working, or basically just working from morning in the at 5 until 11 in the night, non-stop, with breaks for lunch, food, and sleeping a bit. And then also, let's not forget, he was traveling still a lot, because actually in the late years he lived between Rome, Budapest, and Weimar. So he was spending the summer in Weimar, because it was not too hot. It was Germany, so not too hot there. The winter he was spending in Rome, because the winter in Germany would be cold, and in Rome was a bit more mild. And in between he was in Budapest, which is a bit in the middle, where he had his apartment on top of the conservatory. In Rome he had an apartment in the Vatican, because he was a priest, and the Pope gave him an apartment to stay there if he wanted. And then in Weimar he had an apartment. He lived in a castle first, and then with his girlfriend, the Princess San Wittgenstein, and then later he had his apartment as a single man, where he finished his days with his Bechstein. So about his compositions, because Liszt wrote many pieces in his concert career, he reworked many of his previous works. And one of the famous is the Etudes. You have the early version. Actually, in the Etudes, you have this child version, which has this Etude in 12 exercise. Then you have the 36, 37 years with these 12 grandes études, 12 big etudes. And then you have the Etude Transcendental that we know, that most of people play, which is a later version from 50 something. so the period when he retired in Weimar. Yeah, like many composers, it's interesting to see the process he go through. Chopin was doing this on one work, like we saw in the other video, and Liszt was doing this on many years, taking works and rework them. And most of big changes he did is repolishing stuff, making stuff a bit smoother, a bit pleasant to play, maybe not too heavy. And he deleted some stuff. For example, I just wanted to show the difference with Mazeppa. Mazeppa starts with this arpeggio beginning, which we don't have in this first version, where he just started directly here. And he also, in the second version, you have this alternation left-right, and in the first version, you still have this. And in his first etude, in 12th exercise, it's just so you keep this third version here, which he changed on in. So he changed the harmony a bit to make it a bit more smooth, and then also that's also a big change here. Which he changed in. So just a better, smoother sounding version. Then the second variation, which is he did before, he did. So always with this 4-2-4-2, which he insisted on, to have this kind of hoarse running feeling, which he didn't do in the first exercise, where he do these legato thirds. Another big change is actually the slow part here. Became this, and you have like, and the end also is interesting, because the end you have this very big finishing here, where this is a long part with. He didn't do this the first version. The first version is just going from there. So it's just kind of a small cadence on D. Yeah, and then the other big change also he's doing is this here. And the fastest, so the last variation is actually even the same, but even faster. It's kind of quick thirds, which are getting almost impossible, and I guess that's why he changed it. Yeah, so interesting changes, and that's what he did with most of his work. So this would have taken a lot of time to retake all his old works and rewrite them, polishing them. So as conclusion, I would say Liszt has a very interesting life. Now this short video is too short to explore his whole life. It's worth reading a serious biography about Liszt and discovering what an incredible man and musician he was. One of the things I really like with Liszt is he had many different sides, and his music has too, actually. And I think that's why one of the reasons Liszt is not so famous as Chopin, let's say, is because he was, one of the reasons I say, it's because he was difficult to put in a box. It's not like the Liszt is like this or Liszt is like that. He had so many different sides, and his music has too, that I think, yeah, it's difficult for people. People need to put everything in a box. It's more easy to categorize, and then it's more easy to remember or to refer to. So I think that's one of the reasons. And then what I forgot to say also before, so Liszt was working a lot, composing, but he was also busy transcribing works of other composers. So he was mostly trying to help less famous composers that he found interesting by transcribing the works they composed on the piano and performing them themselves, or giving them to an editor who would edit it then. And actually I discovered composers I never heard about because of Liszt. And also I would say Wagner works I discovered first by Liszt. I discovered the Liszt transcriptions. There is a whole book of Liszt transcriptions of Wagner, parts of operas or paraphrase or something. And that's where I discovered the most, even Verdi and other opera stuff. I discovered opera actually thanks to Liszt, so which was his purpose, of course. And yeah, I think that's also that kept him busy, and of course many hours a day transcribing other works, because it's a huge work to do. So yeah, I hope I inspired you to discover or to want to learn a bit more about Liszt and to practice Liszt. So you have the early Liszt, the virtuoso, you have the middle Liszt, great musician, and then you have the late Liszt, which is a completely different world, musical world. All three are really interesting, and see you for next experiment, next video about maybe next composer.